Simone Collins' lungs burned as she sprinted through the rain-slicked streets of Seoul's Gangnam district, her burgundy dress clinging to her curves like a second skin. Thunder cracked overhead, but it couldn't drown out the sound she dreaded most, heavy footsteps gaining ground behind her. "Simone, you can't run forever." The voice belonged to Dante Morrison, her ex-boyfriend, his American accent cutting through the Korean night like a blade. She didn't understand how he'd found her. 3 months. She'd been free for 3 whole months after finally escaping his controlling grip in Chicago. The restraining order, the new phone, the flight across the world to teach English in South Korea, none of it had been enough. Her heels clicked frantically against wet pavement as she turned a corner into an upscale shopping district. Luxury boutiques lined both sides of the street, their windows glowing with warm light that mocked her panic. She could see people inside an expensive restaurant ahead, the kind of place that screamed money and power. A bottle shattered against the wall beside her head. "Stop running, and we can talk about this like adults." Dante's voice was closer now, accompanied by 2 other sets of footsteps. He'd brought friends. Of course he had. Simone's heart hammered against her ribs, maybe 5 seconds before they caught her. Maybe less. Her eyes scanned desperately, and locked onto a man stepping out of a black Mercedes SUV in front of the restaurant. 30-something, tall, lean build inside a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly salary. Sharp jawline, dark hair styled with precision, an aura of controlled danger that made everyone nearby instinctively step back. Even from 15 feet away, she could see the slight scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the way his security detail moved around him with military precision, the subtle bow the restaurant manager gave him. This man was either very important or very dangerous. Probably both. Simone didn't think. Thinking had stopped being an option the moment Dante had cornered her outside her apartment an hour ago. She closed the distance in 3 running steps, grabbed the stranger's hand with both of hers and pressed herself against his side. "Honey, I'm so sorry I'm late," she gasped in her breathless English, then added desperately in broken Korean, "Please, help me, please." The man went absolutely still. His hand, warm, calloused, surprisingly gentle, didn't pull away, but every muscle in his body tensed like a coiled spring. The entire street seemed to hold its breath. His security detail's hands moved toward concealed weapons. The restaurant manager's eyes widened in shock. A woman in designer clothes actually gasped. The stranger turned his head slowly, deliberately, and Simone found herself staring into the darkest eyes she'd ever seen. Not cruel, not kind, simply assessing, like he was calculating 1,000 variables in the space of a heartbeat. "Who are you?" His English was perfect, accent minimal but present, voice cold as winter steel. "Before you find out what happens next, do me a favor. Hit that like button if you're already hooked. Drop a comment telling me, would you grab a stranger's hand to escape danger or find another way out? And subscribe to Love and Tension because this story is about to get wild. Trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next." Simone's fingers trembled against the stranger's hand, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. Those dark eyes revealed nothing. No anger, no confusion, just an unsettling calm that suggested he'd faced far more surprising situations than a random woman grabbing him on a Seoul street. "3 men, she whispered, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to control it. "American. One's my ex. They've been following me for 6 blocks. I can't—" Her breath hitched. "I can't go back to him." The stranger's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those obsidian eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or calculation. "Mr. Lee," one of his security guards said in rapid Korean, hand still hovering near his jacket. "Should we—" "Wait." The word was soft but absolute. The guard froze immediately. Simone felt the exact moment Dante spotted her. The air shifted, pressure building like a storm about to break. She didn't dare turn around, but she could hear his approach, that specific cadence of footsteps she'd learned to recognize in 12 months of dating that had slowly transformed into 12 months of hell. "Simone!" Dante's voice carried across the space between them, smooth and controlled in that way that had once seemed charming, but now just sounded predatory. "There you are, baby. We've been looking everywhere for you." The stranger, Mr. Lee apparently, still hadn't moved. His hand remained steady under hers, neither welcoming nor rejecting her touch. He was watching her face with an intensity that should have been frightening, but somehow felt protective. "You know these men?" he asked quietly. "The tall one with the scar on his neck? Dante Morrison. We dated in Chicago. I left him 3 months ago. There's a restraining order, but—" She swallowed hard. "He doesn't care about restraining orders." Mr. Lee's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then he did something Simone didn't expect. He smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile a wolf might give before showing its teeth. He turned slowly, deliberately positioning himself so Simone was slightly behind him, and faced the three approaching men. Dante stopped about 10 feet away, flanked by two men Simone didn't recognize. Both were built like former military, all muscle and cold stares. Dante himself looked exactly as she remembered. 6'2", conventionally handsome in that bland way, sandy hair perfectly styled, wearing expensive casual clothes that screamed American money abroad. "I don't know who you are," Dante said, his smile not reaching his eyes as he looked at Mr. Lee, "but that's my girlfriend. We just had a little argument. You know how it is." "I am not your girlfriend," Simone said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I left you. I filed a restraining order. You're violating it by being here." "In Korea?" Dante laughed, the sound grating against her nerves. "Your little piece of paper from Chicago doesn't mean shit here, baby. Now stop embarrassing yourself and let's go have a conversation like rational adults." Mr. Lee tilted his head slightly, studying Dante with the same clinical assessment he'd given Simone. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made everyone in earshot instinctively pay attention. She said no. 3 words. Quiet. Absolute. Dante's smile faltered. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble. Just let me talk to my girl. She is not your girl." Mr. Lee's English remained perfect, each word precisely articulated. "She is currently holding my hand, which makes her under my protection. I suggest you leave. Now." The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Simone watched Dante's face shift through several emotions: confusion, anger, calculation. His eyes moved from Mr. Lee to the security detail fanned out behind him, to the restaurant staff who had emerged to watch, to the growing crowd of onlookers. "Do you know who I am?" Dante tried a different tactic. "My father owns Morrison Security Consulting. We have contracts in 15 countries, including South Korea. One phone call, and I can make your life very complicated." "Do you know who I am?" Mr. Lee countered, and something in his tone made Simone's stomach drop. Dante paused, really looked at the man in front of him for the first time, took in the expensive suit, the military-precise security detail, the way every staff member from the restaurant was bowing slightly in deference. One of Dante's friends leaned in, whispered something urgent in his ear. Dante's face went pale. "I didn't realize," he started, but Mr. Lee cut him off with a raised hand. "You have 10 seconds to walk away. After that, my patience expires, and when my patience expires..." He let the sentence hang, unfinished, but perfectly clear. For a long moment, nobody moved. Simone could feel her heartbeat in her throat, could feel the tremor in her own hands where they still clutched Mr. Lee's sleeve. Then, Dante stepped back. Just one step, but it felt like a retreat. "This isn't over, Simone," he said, trying to salvage some dignity. "You can't hide behind him forever." 10, Mr. Lee said softly. 9, 8. Dante turned and walked away, his two companions following. They disappeared around the corner, but Simone knew. God, she knew. They wouldn't stop. Dante never stopped. That was the problem. The crowd began to disperse, returning to their shopping and dining, though many kept glancing back with curious eyes. Mr. Lee's security detail relaxed incrementally, hands moving away from weapons, though their vigilance never truly wavered. Only then did Mr. Lee look down at Simone again. His expression remained neutral, but there was a question in his eyes. "Thank you," she breathed, finally releasing his hand. Her fingers felt cold without the contact. "I'm sorry for grabbing you like that. I was desperate, and you looked..." She stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence without sounding insane. "Dangerous?" he supplied, one eyebrow arching slightly. "Important," she corrected, like someone who could make him stop. "I made him leave. I did not make him stop." The distinction was deliberate. "He will return. Men like that always do." Simone's stomach sank because she knew he was right. "I know. I just needed, I don't know, a moment to breathe maybe, to think." Mr. Lee studied her for a long moment, then gestured toward the restaurant. "You're shaking. Come, sit. We will talk." It wasn't really a request, but it wasn't quite a command either. Simone hesitated, very aware that she'd just traded one potentially dangerous situation for another. She knew nothing about this man, except that he had enough power to scare off Dante with a few words. But she was cold, exhausted, and still terrified, and something about the way he'd positioned himself between her and Dante, not possessive, just protective, made her trust him more than her rational mind suggested she should. "Okay," she said quietly. "Thank you." He led her inside the restaurant, and the manager practically fell over himself to escort them to a private room in the back. The security detail took up positions outside, silent and efficient. Simone found herself seated across from Mr. Broad Lee at a low table in a beautifully appointed room with traditional Korean artwork on the walls. A server appeared immediately with hot tea, then vanished at a subtle gesture from Mr. Lee. "Tell me," he said, pouring tea for both of them with practiced grace. "Exactly what happened. Start from the beginning." So she did. Simone explained about meeting Dante in Chicago, how charming he'd seemed at first, how slowly, almost imperceptibly, he'd isolated her from friends and family, how the control had escalated, monitoring her phone, questioning her whereabouts, making her feel crazy for wanting normal independence, how it had never gotten physically violent, but the threat was always there, simmering beneath every conversation. I left 8 months ago, she said, wrapping her hands around the warm teacup. Stayed with a friend. Filed the restraining order, changed my number, applied for teaching positions abroad because I knew staying in Chicago meant he'd always find me. I got accepted to teach English here in Seoul 2 months ago. I thought I was safe. But he found you? It wasn't a question. This morning, he was waiting outside my apartment building. I don't know how he knew where I lived. I ran. He chased. I've been running for hours, trying to lose him in the crowds, but she shook her head. He's persistent. Mr. Lee's fingers drummed once against the table, the only sign of emotion she'd seen from him. Morrison Security Consulting. I know of them. They do corporate security, executive protection, some government contracts. Not entirely legitimate, but they maintain a clean enough facade. You know them? Simone asked, surprised. I make it my business to know anyone operating in my city who might become problematic. He sipped his tea, dark eyes never leaving her face. Tell me, Simone Collins, why should I continue to help you? The blunt question shouldn't have surprised her, but it did. She didn't know what she'd expected. More questions, maybe. Some expression of sympathy. Not this cold cost-benefit analysis, but somehow she respected him more for it. I don't know if you should, she admitted. I grabbed you because I was desperate and you looked powerful enough to make him hesitate. It worked. You don't owe me anything beyond what you've already done. That is correct. I do not. He set down his teacup with precise care. However, I am not a man who acts without purpose. When you grabbed my hand, you created a situation. Everyone who was present saw you claim connection to me. They saw me protect you. In my world, that matters. Your world? Simone repeated carefully. I think you are intelligent enough to guess that I am not a simple businessman, Miss Collins. She was. The security detail, the way people reacted to him, the casual mention of knowing about Morrison Security's legitimacy issues, it all painted a clear picture. You're involved in organized crime, she said flatly. I prefer to think of it as operating in the spaces between official structures, he replied with a slight smile. But yes, my name is Lee Sung-ho. My family has interests throughout Seoul and beyond. When you grabbed my hand tonight, you accidentally placed yourself under my protection in a very public way. That creates obligations. For both of us. Simone's heart sank. She'd escaped one controlling man, only to potentially bind herself to someone even more dangerous. I didn't mean to create obligations. I was just trying to survive. I understand, but intent does not change consequence. He refilled both their teacups, the gesture oddly domestic given the conversation. Your ex-boyfriend will not stop pursuing you. Men who need to control rarely surrender that easily. Morrison Security has resources, money, connections. If he wants to find you, he will keep finding you. I know, Simone whispered, hating how defeated she sounded. However, Lee Sung-ho continued, he does not have the resources I have. If you were truly under my protection, not just appearing to be in a moment of crisis, but genuinely connected to me, he would not dare approach you again. Simone looked up sharply. What are you suggesting? A transaction. You need protection from a persistent threat. He paused, considering his words. I need someone who can move in certain social circles without raising suspicion. Someone Western, educated, presentable. Someone who appears to be exactly what they are, a teacher, legitimate, with no connections to my world. You want to use me as a cover, Simone said, understanding clicking into place. I want to offer you genuine protection in exchange for occasional assistance, he corrected. You would continue teaching, living your life. But when I need someone to attend a charity event, to make an introduction, to be present at a gathering where my usual associates would stand out, you would be there. As what? Your girlfriend? The word tasted strange. As someone under my protection. The specific label is less important than the reality. You would be safe, financially comfortable, free to live your life within reasonable boundaries, and Dante Morrison would never touch you again. It was too good to be true. Simone had learned that lesson the hard way with Dante. Anything that seemed perfect always had hidden costs. What's the catch? She asked directly. Lee Sung-ho smiled again, and this time it reached his eyes. You are intelligent. Good. The catch is that association with me comes with risks. People in my world have enemies. Those enemies might target you to get to me. You would need security, always. Your movements would be monitored for your own safety. Your independence would be limited. So I'd trade one cage for another? Perhaps. Or you could view it as trading an unstable, abusive situation for a stable, protective one, with clear boundaries and mutual benefit. He leaned back slightly. I am not your ex-boyfriend, Miss Collins. I do not need to control you to feel powerful. I need competent people around me who can fulfill specific roles. You need protection from a genuine threat. This is business. Simone stared into her teacup, mind racing. Everything he said made logical sense, but logic and safety were two different things. How long? She asked. 1 year. After that, we renegotiate or part ways cleanly. I would ensure you have enough money to relocate anywhere you choose, with guarantees that Morrison would not find you again. And if I say no, then I thank you for an interesting evening, ensure you get home safely tonight, and wish you the best of luck managing your situation on your own. His tone suggested he genuinely would do exactly that. Simone considered. She could refuse, go to the police, try to handle Dante through official channels. But she knew how that story ended. She'd already tried restraining orders, and they were just paper. Dante's father had money and connections. She was a foreign English teacher with no real resources in South Korea. Or she could accept this stranger's offer, trade her independence for safety, work for a criminal to escape being victimized by a predator. Neither option was good, but one gave her a fighting chance. I have conditions, she said finally. Lee Sung-ho's eyes glinted with something that might have been respect. I would be disappointed if you did not. Speak. First, no sex. I don't care how this looks to other people, but I'm not sleeping with you as part of this arrangement. Agreed. I have no shortage of willing partners. I do not need to coerce employees. The casual acknowledgement should have bothered her, but somehow his honesty was refreshing after Dante's manipulations. Second, I keep teaching. My students depend on me, and I actually like my job. Acceptable. As long as it does not interfere with when I need your presence elsewhere. We can arrange your schedule to accommodate both. Third, if I want out before the year is up, you let me go. No threats, no retaliation, no hunting me down. This time he paused, considering. If you wish to leave, we negotiate an exit that protects both our interests. I will not hunt you down, but I also will not allow you to become a liability. If you prove trustworthy, leaving will be simple. If you betray me, he left the sentence unfinished. It wasn't a perfect guarantee, but it was probably the best she'd get. Okay, Simone said, her voice steadier than she felt. 1 year. I help you when needed. You protect me from Dante and make sure he never finds me again. 1 year, Lee Sung-ho agreed. He extended his hand across the table. Simone stared at it for a long moment, remembering how she'd grabbed this same hand in desperation just 30 minutes ago. How warm it had felt. How steady. She shook it. His grip was firm, professional, and released after exactly the appropriate amount of time. Nothing possessive about it. Just a business agreement between two people who needed something from each other. My driver will take you home tonight, he said, standing. Tomorrow, one of my associates will contact you to arrange your first security briefing and discuss logistics. Do you have questions? Hundreds, Simone admitted, but I'm too tired to think of them right now. Understandable. Go home. Rest. We will address details tomorrow. He walked her to the door, where his security detail waited. Min-jun will escort you. He speaks English and will ensure you arrive safely. One of the guards, a compact man with alert eyes, stepped forward and bowed slightly to Simone. Thank you, she said to Lee Sung-ho, for tonight, for all of this. Thank me in a year, he replied. If you still feel grateful then, I will know I did this correctly. Simone left the restaurant with Min-jun, a respectful 3 steps behind her. The rain had stopped, leaving the Seoul streets glistening under neon lights. Somewhere out there, Dante was probably regrouping, planning his next move. But for the first time in hours, maybe months, Simone felt like she could breathe. She'd made a deal with someone dangerous, she knew that, but at least this danger was honest about what it was. As the black SUV pulled away from the curb, Simone caught one last glimpse of Lee Sung-ho through the restaurant window. He was on his phone, speaking rapidly in Korean, his expression carved from stone. She wondered what she'd really just agreed to. She'd find out soon enough. The first test came at 6 a.m. the next morning. Simone jolted awake to someone knocking firmly on her apartment door. For one terrified moment, she thought it was Dante, that Lee Sung-ho's protection had been empty promises, that she was back to running and hiding and never feeling safe. But the knock was too measured, too professional. She threw on a robe and checked the peephole. A woman stood in the hallway, early 30s, slim build, perfect posture, wearing a tailored gray suit that screamed expensive efficiency. Her black hair was pulled into a sleek ponytail, and even through the distorted fisheye lens, Simone could see the intelligence in her sharp features. Miss Collins, the woman said in crisp English, apparently knowing Simone was watching. My name is Rachel Kwan. Mr. Lee sent me. May I come in? Simone opened the door cautiously. It's 6 in the morning. Yes. Mr. Lee believes in starting early. Rachel entered without waiting for explicit permission, her eyes sweeping the small studio apartment in one practiced glance. You have coffee? Instant. That will suffice. 10 minutes later, they sat across from each other at Simone's tiny kitchen table, 2 mugs of mediocre instant coffee between them. Rachel had pulled out a tablet and was scrolling through something with focused intensity. First things first, Rachel said. Your housing situation is unacceptable. This building has no security, your door lock is laughably easy to bypass, and you're on the ground floor with a window that faces an alley. We're moving you today. Today? I have a lease, which Mr. Lee will handle. You'll be relocated to a secured building in Gangnam. 24th floor, bulletproof windows, biometric access, 24-hour security staff vetted by our people. Your belongings will be moved this afternoon while you're at work. Simone's head spun. This feels like you're taking over my entire life. We are ensuring you survive your life, Rachel corrected calmly. Dante Morrison checked into the Grand Hyatt Seoul yesterday afternoon. He's not hiding. He's planning. Men with resources don't chase women across the world unless they're obsessive, and obsessive men are dangerous. We need you somewhere he cannot reach. The casual confirmation that Dante was still in Seoul sent ice through Simone's veins. How do you know where he's staying? Because knowing things is my job. Rachel swiped to a new screen on her tablet. I'm Mr. Lee's executive assistant, but my actual function is information management. I know where threats are, what they're planning, and how to neutralize them before they become problems. You are now part of my portfolio. Should I be flattered or terrified? Both. Rachel's expression remained perfectly neutral. Now, your teaching schedule. You work at Hansong English Academy, correct? Classes Tuesday through Saturday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m.? Yes. We'll position 2 security personnel near the academy at all times. They'll maintain distance so as not to alarm your students or colleagues, but they will be present. You will also carry this. Rachel slid a slim phone across the table. Emergency contacts are pre-programmed. If you feel threatened, press the side button 3 times rapidly. Response time will be under 2 minutes. Simone picked up the phone, feeling its weight. This is really happening. You agreed to Mr. Lee's protection. This is what protection looks like. Rachel's tone softened marginally. I understand this feels overwhelming, but I've seen what men like Morrison do and they're not stopped. Mr. Lee's methods are thorough because they work. Trust the system. And what does Mr. Lee get out of this again? I'm just a teacher. What could I possibly do for him that's worth all this effort? Rachel studied her for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. Mr. Lee operates in a world where everyone knows everyone, where every face is cataloged, every association tracked. You are invisible to that world. You're a Western woman teaching English, as far as anyone investigating would discover. That invisibility has value. For what? That is Mr. Lee's business to explain when he's ready. Rachel stood, collecting her tablet. For now, focus on your teaching and adjusting to your new security protocols. Next week, you'll attend a charity gala with Mr. Lee. I'll send you details about appropriate attire and behavior expectations. Do you own formal wear? I have a couple of dresses. I'll arrange a stylist. You'll need something suitable for the event. Rachel headed for the door, then paused. Miss Collins, one more thing. You asked Mr. Lee last night why he should help you. I'll give you the answer he won't say himself. He has a younger sister. She was in a relationship similar to yours. When she finally left, the man would not accept it. Mr. Lee handled the situation permanently. So when you grabbed his hand last night, you were not just asking a stranger for help. You were asking someone who understands exactly what you're running from. Before Simone could respond, Rachel was gone. The apartment felt very quiet suddenly. Simone looked around at her small space. The second-hand furniture, the stack of textbooks on the floor, the single photograph of her mother on the windowsill. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Or it had been. Now, apparently, she belonged to someone else's protection. She should have felt trapped, controlled, like she'd traded Dante's cage for Lee Seung-ho's. But strangely, she didn't. Maybe because Lee hadn't asked her to change who she was, hadn't asked her to cut her hair or wear different clothes or stop seeing friends. He'd just removed the immediate threat and put structures in place to keep her safe. The control felt different, clinical, professional, not personal. Simone wasn't naive enough to think that made it okay, but it made it tolerable. And tolerating this situation for a year in exchange for Dante never finding her again? She could do that. Her classes that day passed in a blur. Simone taught present perfect tense to her intermediate students, corrected pronunciation with her advanced group, and graded quizzes during lunch, all while hyper-aware of the 2 men in dark suits positioned across the street from the academy. Her students didn't notice them. Her colleagues didn't notice them. but Simone felt their presence like a weight, reassuring and unsettling in equal measure. When she finished her last class, a black sedan was waiting at the curb, different from last night's SUV, but the same aura of expensive efficiency. The driver, a woman this time, middle-aged with kind eyes, introduced herself as Yuna and explained she'd be Simone's primary driver going forward. "Your new apartment is ready," Yuna said in careful English as they merged into Seoul's chaotic evening traffic. "Miss Rachel arranged everything. Very nice place. You will like." The new building was not just nice, it was luxury Simone had only seen in magazines. The lobby had marble floors, abstract art installations, and a security desk staffed by 3 guards who all nodded respectfully to Yuna. The elevator required both a key card and fingerprint scan. When the doors opened on the 24th floor, there were only 2 apartments, and one of them was hers. Inside, Simone found her belongings had been moved with meticulous care. Her books were alphabetized on new shelves. Her clothes hung in a walk-in closet that was bigger than her old apartment's bedroom. The furniture was modern, expensive, and perfectly arranged. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Seoul's nighttime skyline. On the kitchen counter, she found a note in precise handwriting. "Welcome to your new home. Security operates 24 hours. Rachel will contact you tomorrow regarding the gala. Rest tonight. You are safe here. L.S. Taj." Simone stood at the window, looking out at the glittering city spread below her like a jeweled blanket. Somewhere down there, Dante was plotting, scheming, figuring out how to get to her. But up here, 24 floors above the street with bulletproof glass between her and the world, Simone finally let herself exhale. For the first time in 8 months, she felt safe enough to sleep without nightmares. The week passed in a strange new rhythm. Simone taught her classes, ate meals she hadn't cooked in a kitchen she was still learning, and adjusted to the constant presence of security she couldn't always see but knew was there. Rachel checked in daily with updates. Dante was still in Seoul, still asking questions about Simone's whereabouts, but Lee Sung-ho's network had successfully obscured her location. "He knows you have protection," Rachel explained during one of their coffee meetings, "but he doesn't know the extent or source. That uncertainty is your advantage." Friday evening, a team of stylists arrived at Simone's apartment with 6 garment bags and 3 cases of accessories. The lead stylist, a sharp-eyed woman named Soo-jin, assessed Simone with the clinical precision of a surgeon planning an operation. "Mr. Lee specified elegant but not submissive," Soo-jin said, circling Simone like a predator sizing up prey. "You need to look like you belong at his side, but like you chose to be there. Not purchased, not owned, accompanying." They settled on a midnight blue dress that hugged Simone's curves without clinging, the neckline sophisticated rather than revealing, the fabric expensive enough to whisper when she moved. Heels that added 3 inches to her height, simple diamond earrings that Rachel mentioned were on loan from Mr. Lee's collection in a tone that suggested they cost more than Simone's yearly salary. "Remember," Rachel said as the stylists packed up, "this is not a date. This is a professional appearance. You are there to be seen with Mr. Lee, to deflect certain questions, to make his presence at a charity event seem less connected to his business interests and more connected to personal life. Smile politely, make small talk. Let him guide conversations. Do not volunteer information about yourself beyond surface details. What if someone asks how we met? Tell them the truth. You met by chance when you needed help, and he provided it. People will assume romance. You neither confirm nor deny. Ambiguity serves our purposes." The night of the gala, Min Jun arrived at 7 p.m. sharp to escort Simone downstairs. But instead of the usual sedan, a midnight blue Bentley waited at the curb, its paint job perfectly matching Simone's dress. Lee Sung-ho stood beside it, and for the first time since that rainy night, Simone saw him in something other than a business suit. He wore a tuxedo tailored with such precision it looked painted on, his hair styled back to show that scar through his eyebrow more prominently. He looked elegant and dangerous in equal measure, like violence wrapped in expensive fabric. His eyes traveled over her appearance once, quickly, assessing rather than leering. "You look appropriate," he said, which was possibly the least romantic compliment Simone had ever received. "Thank you," she replied uncertainly. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I meant you look like someone who chose to be here, not someone who was purchased for the occasion. That distinction matters tonight." He opened the car door himself. No driver, Simone noticed, and waited until she was settled before closing it gently and walking around to the driver's side. "You drive yourself?" she asked as he started the engine. "When I want privacy for conversation, yes." He pulled smoothly into traffic, handling the expensive car with casual expertise. "Tonight you will meet people who will try to determine what you mean to me. Some will be business associates. Some will be potential enemies gathering intelligence. All will be watching. What should I say if they ask about us directly? Whatever truth feels comfortable. I grabbed your hand to escape danger. I helped. We discovered we enjoyed each other's company. The details beyond that are private. He glanced at her briefly before returning his attention to the road. But there is one thing you should know before we arrive. What? There is a possibility that Dante Morrison will be there tonight. Simone's stomach dropped. What? Why would he? Because his father's company was invited to send a representative, and Dante is representing them. I discovered this 2 hours ago. We can turn around now if you prefer. I will not force you to face him. Every instinct screamed at Simone to say yes, turn around, hide. But something else, something harder that had been growing in her since that first terrified sprint through Seoul's streets, pushed back. Will I be safe? She asked. Yes. He will not approach you while you are with me. He is arrogant, but he is not suicidal. Lee's voice carried absolute certainty. However, seeing you there, successful, protected, beyond his reach, will infuriate him. That fury might make him reckless later. You should understand that risk before choosing to attend. Simone thought about it, about spending another night hiding, letting Dante's shadow dictate her movements, about the years stretching ahead where she'd be looking over her shoulder constantly unless something changed. I want to go, she said firmly. I want him to see that he doesn't control me anymore. Lee Sung-ho nodded once, something that might have been approval flickering across his features. Then we go, but stay close to me, always. The gala was held at one of Seoul's most prestigious hotels, the ballroom glittering with chandeliers and decorated in elegant whites and golds. Women in designer gowns drifted through crowds of men in expensive tuxedos, champagne flowing freely, string quartet playing softly in the background. The air hummed with money and power and carefully cultivated appearances. Lee Sung-ho's arrival caused a ripple effect. Conversations paused, heads turned. People recalibrated their movements to either intersect with his path or avoid it, depending on their relationship to him. His hand settled at the small of Simone's back, not possessive, just guiding as they entered. The touch was warm through the thin fabric of her dress, steady and somehow reassuring. Smile, he murmured. You are supposed to be enjoying yourself, not attending an execution. Simone forced her lips into something approaching a smile. Easy for you to say. Everyone here either fears you or wants something from you. I'm just trying not to trip in these heels. That almost smile appeared again. Then we make a good pair. I navigate the politics. You navigate the footwear. Together, we survive the evening. They made their way through the crowd, Lee stopping occasionally to exchange brief pleasantries with various people. Each introduction followed the same pattern. Lee would present Simone simply as Miss Collins, offer no explanation of their relationship, and allow the other person's curiosity to hang unanswered in the air. Simone noticed how he positioned himself, always between her and potential threats, always within arm's reach, never leaving her isolated or vulnerable to uncomfortable questions. You're good at this, she observed quietly during a lull in conversations. At what? Protection without imprisonment. Dante always made me feel like I was on display, like he was showing off property. You make me feel like I'm here because I chose to be. Lee's expression flickered with something complex. Because you did choose to be here. Our arrangement is transactional, not possessive. I protect you. You assist me. Neither of us owns the other. Before Simone could respond, a cold voice cut through the ambient noise. Well, this is unexpected. Simone's entire body went rigid. She knew that voice the way trauma survivors know the sound of their attacker's footsteps. Dante stood 10 feet away, champagne glass in hand, wearing a perfectly tailored tuxedo that his father's money had purchased. He looked exactly as he always did, handsome, charming, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Lee Sung-ho's hand at Simone's back pressed slightly firmer, not restraining, anchoring. Morrison, Lee said coolly, I did not realize you were attending tonight. Last-minute addition. My father thought it important to strengthen our soul connections. Dante's eyes moved to Simone, traveling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. Hello, baby. You look beautiful. That dress is new. Who bought it for you? The implication was clear. The insinuation designed to make her feel small, purchased, like an object rather than a person. Lee Sung-ho spoke before Simone could formulate a response. Miss Collins is under my protection, Morrison. That means you address her with respect, or you do not address her at all. Protection, Dante repeated, his smile sharpening. Is that what we're calling it? How much does protection cost these days, Simone? More than what I gave you, apparently. Simone felt rage crystallize in her chest, clean, pure, and surprisingly empowering. For 8 months she'd been afraid of this man, afraid of his manipulation, his control, his ability to make her doubt her own reality. But standing here, in this glittering ballroom, with Lee Seung-ho's steady presence beside her, she realized something profound. Dante had no power anymore. "You never gave me anything, Dante," she said clearly. "You took my time, my confidence, my sense of safety. Every gift came with strings. Every kindness came with expectations. That's not giving, that's purchasing." Dante's expression darkened. "I loved you. You loved controlling me," Simone interrupted. "There's a difference, and the fact that you flew across the world to keep controlling me proves you still don't understand that difference. I came here to bring you home. I am home. Seoul is my home now. My students are here. My life is here. And most importantly, you are not here." She took a breath, steadying herself. "Go back to Chicago, Dante. Find someone else to control. I'm done being your project." For a moment, Dante just stared at her. Then his face twisted into something ugly, all pretense of charm vanishing. "You think he's better than me?" He gestured at Lee Seung-ho. "You know what he is, right? What he does? At least I'm legitimate. At least my hands are clean." "Your hands," Lee Seung-ho said quietly, "tried to grab a woman who said no, multiple times, in multiple countries. That does not sound clean to me. That sounds desperate. I wasn't talking to you. You are talking near someone under my protection, which means you are talking to me." Lee's voice remained calm, but something cold entered his eyes. "I told you once to walk away. I suggest you remember that advice." Dante's jaw clenched. Simone could see him calculating, weighing his options, his arrogance warring with basic survival instinct. "This isn't over," he said finally, directing the words at Simone. "Yes," she replied firmly. "It is." Lee Seung-ho moved then, just one step forward, placing himself fully between Simone and Dante. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. The message was perfectly clear. Dante stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd with rigid shoulders and barely controlled fury. Simone released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline flooding her system now that the confrontation was over. "You did well," Lee said quietly, turning back to her. "You held your ground without escalating. That takes strength." "I wanted to hit him," Simone admitted. "Is that terrible?" "No, that is human. But hitting him would have given him ammunition, evidence of your instability, proof of his claims about you being irrational. Your composure denied him that ammunition." Lee guided her toward a quieter corner of the ballroom, away from curious onlookers. "Do you need to leave?" "No." Simone surprised herself with how much she meant it. "I need to stay. I need to prove, to him and to myself, that he doesn't get to dictate when I leave anymore." Something shifted in Lee Seung-ho's expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "Then we stay," he said simply. They spent the next 2 hours circulating through the gala. Lee introduced Simone to business associates, cultural figures, and various members of Seoul's elite society. She made polite conversation, laughed at appropriate moments, and played the role of mysterious companion with surprising ease. And through it all, she was aware of Dante watching from across the room, his eyes following her movements, his jaw tight with barely suppressed anger. But he never approached again. When they finally left, well past midnight, Simone's feet ached from the heels, and her face hurt from holding a pleasant expression for so long. But she also felt something unexpected: triumph. Lee Seung-ho drove in silence for the first 10 minutes, giving her space to process. Then, stopped at a red light, he spoke. "When Morrison approaches you again, and he will, do not engage. Call security immediately. Men like him cannot accept defeat, which makes them dangerous in unpredictable ways. You think he'll escalate? I think he saw you happy tonight, confident, beyond his reach. That will enrage him more than any words could." The light changed, and Lee accelerated smoothly. "He will try to regain control somehow. We must be prepared for that." Simone nodded, feeling the temporary triumph fade slightly. "This is my life now, isn't it? Always watching for him, always preparing for the next confrontation." "For a time, yes, but not forever." Lee glanced at her briefly. "We will make it clear to Morrison that pursuing you is too costly to continue. That will require patience and strategy, but it will happen. I promise you that." "Why?" Simone asked quietly. "Why do you care so much about keeping that promise? Is it really just about your sister?" Lee was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried weight. "My sister's ex-boyfriend would not stop. We tried restraining orders, we tried police involvement, we tried having him followed so he knew we were watching. Nothing worked. He became obsessed with reclaiming her, with punishing her for leaving. One night he broke into her apartment while she was sleeping." Simone's breath caught. "What happened?" "She called me. I arrived in time." Lee's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "I handled the situation, permanently. My sister is safe now, living in Paris under a new name with a new life." but the trauma of those months when she was hunted. He shook his head. I will not allow another woman to endure that if I have the power to prevent it. So this really is about protection, Simone said softly. Not control. They can look similar from the outside, Lee acknowledged. But the difference is consent. You agreed to this arrangement. You can end it. You maintain agency. That distinction matters more than any security protocol I could implement. They pulled up to Simone's building. Lee got out, opened her door, and walked her to the lobby entrance despite the late hour. Thank you, Simone said, for tonight, for understanding why I needed to face him. You did not need my understanding. You needed my presence to ensure your safety while you faced him. That is what protection means, enabling you to make brave choices rather than preventing you from making any choices at all. He turned to leave, then paused. Rachel will contact you Monday about your next appearance. Rest this weekend. You earned it. Simone watched him return to the Bentley, watched him drive away into Seoul's glittering night. She went up to her apartment, took off the borrowed diamonds, hung up the beautiful dress, and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the city. Somewhere down there, Dante was probably planning his next move. But up here, Simone felt something she hadn't felt in over a year, safe enough to plan her own moves. And that made all the difference. 3 weeks passed in careful routine. Simone taught her classes, attended 2 more events with Lee Sung-ho, a business dinner and a gallery opening, and slowly adjusted to her new reality. Dante remained in Seoul, his presence a constant shadow, but he kept his distance. Rachel's security protocols were working until the Thursday afternoon when everything shifted. Simone was grading papers in her classroom after hours when her emergency phone buzzed 3 times in rapid succession. Not her pressing the panic button, an incoming urgent message from Rachel. Morrison made a move. Stay at the academy. Security is on the way. Do not leave the building. Simone's heart hammered. She looked around the empty classroom, suddenly aware of how isolated she was. The academy would be closing in 30 minutes. Most teachers had already left. Her phone buzzed again. Rachel calling. What happened? Simone answered immediately. Morrison filed a police report claiming you stole money from him in Chicago before fleeing to Seoul, Rachel said, her voice tight with controlled anger. It's completely fabricated, but he has forged bank statements and communications showing large transfers to accounts in your name. Seoul police are required to investigate international theft claims. That's insane. I know, we know. But Morrison's father has connections in the Chicago Police Department. They are treating his claim as legitimate, which means Seoul authorities must respond. 2 officers are on their way to your academy now to question you. Simone's hands went numb. What do I do? Exactly what we tell you. Do not speak to them without a lawyer present. Do not agree to go anywhere. Do not sign anything. Mr. Lee is sending his attorney now. She will arrive before the police do. This is about intimidation, Simone realized. He's trying to scare me. Yes, and to create legal complications that would require you to remain in Seoul for the investigation, giving him time to... Rachel paused. It does not matter what he is planning. We will stop this before it develops. If you're watching from somewhere in America, drop a comment. Have you ever had to deal with someone who wouldn't let go? How did you handle it? 20 minutes later, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s arrived at the academy. She introduced herself as attorney Han Mi-sun and immediately took control of the situation with terrifying competence. When the police officers arrived, both young, both looking uncomfortable about questioning a foreign teacher based on clearly questionable evidence, Attorney Han presented a comprehensive file showing Simone's legitimate employment, her bank statements proving no unusual transfers, and character references from her academy director. My client will of course cooperate with your investigation, Attorney Han said in flawless Korean, then English for Simone's benefit. However, it appears the complainant has a documented history of harassment against Ms. Collins. There is a restraining order filed in Chicago. Ms. Collins fled to Seoul specifically to escape this harassment. This theft claim appears to be a continuation of that harassment pattern. The officers looked at each other uncertainly. The senior one spoke to Simone in careful English. Miss Collins, did you take money from Mr. Morrison? No. We dated for a year. When I left, I took nothing except my personal belongings. I have bank statements showing my income as a teacher. That's all the money I have. She will provide any documents your investigation requires, Attorney Han interjected smoothly. However, I must note that making false police reports is a criminal offense in both South Korea and the United States. If this investigation reveals the theft claim to be fabricated, my client will pursue charges against Mr. Morrison for malicious prosecution and harassment. The officers took notes, asked a few more perfunctory questions, and left with assurances they would conduct a thorough but fair investigation. When they were gone, Attorney Han turned to Simone. Morrison is escalating. This will not be his last attempt to create legal leverage. We need to shift from defensive measures to offensive ones. What does that mean? It means Mr. Lee must decide how permanently he wishes to remove this threat. Attorney Han's expression remained professionally neutral, but her meaning was clear. Simone's stomach twisted. I don't want anyone hurt because of me. Sometimes hurt is the only language certain men understand. Attorney Han collected her files. Mr. Lee will discuss options with you. My job was simply to ensure you were not arrested tonight. That job is complete. After Attorney Han left, Min Jun appeared to escort Simone home. The drive was silent, tense. When they reached her building, Lee Sung-ho himself was waiting in the lobby. We need to talk, he said quietly. Upstairs. In her apartment, Lee moved directly to the windows, staring out at the city the way Simone often did, but where she sought comfort in the view. He seemed to be studying it for threats. Morrison is not stopping, he said without preamble. The police report is harassment, but it establishes a pattern. He will file more complaints, create more legal entanglements, use bureaucracy as a weapon to keep you trapped here while he plans his actual move. What's his actual move? Lee turned to face her. Kidnapping. Forcible return to the United States. He believes if he can get you back to Chicago, onto his territory, he can control you again. The legal harassment is just to keep you stationary and distracted while he arranges logistics. How do you know that? Because I know men like him. And because my people intercepted communications between Morrison and a private security contractor who specializes in international extractions. Legal abductions, essentially. Taking people across borders under the guise of protective custody or voluntary return. Simone felt ice flood her veins. When? Soon, within the week most likely. He is running out of patience and money. His father will not fund this obsession indefinitely. Morrison knows he has a limited window to act. So what do we do? Lee Sung-ho was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight Simone hadn't heard before. I can eliminate this threat, permanently. Morrison could have an accident or simply disappear, or be arrested on legitimate charges my people could easily manufacture and substantiate. I have the resources and connections to remove him from your life entirely. You're talking about killing him, Simone said flatly, or imprisoning him, or destroying his reputation so thoroughly that he loses all resources to continue pursuing you. I am offering you options, not a single solution. Lee's dark eyes met hers. But all options involve me using violence, direct or indirect, on your behalf. You must decide if you can accept that. Simone walked to the window, standing beside him, looking out at Seoul's nighttime sprawl. If you kill him, that makes me responsible for his death. No, his obsession made him responsible for his own death. You would simply be choosing to protect yourself. And if I say no, if I tell you I can't have that on my conscience, then we continue defensive measures, better security, legal counterattacks, making it increasingly difficult for him to operate. Eventually, he will run out of resources or motivation and give up. Probably. Probably? Simone repeated. Men like Morrison rarely give up when given the choice. They have to be forced to stop. The question is how much force you are comfortable with me applying. Simone thought about Dante, about the months of manipulation and control, about the fear that had driven her across the world. About standing in that ballroom 3 weeks ago, finally feeling strong enough to tell him no. She thought about Lee Sung-ho's sister, about what it meant that he'd handled the situation permanently. I don't want him dead, she said slowly, but I do want him stopped. Completely. Permanently. In whatever way accomplishes that without me having to carry the weight of someone's death. Lee nodded. Then we pursue option 2. I make him understand that continuing this pursuit will cost him everything he values. His father's business, his freedom, his future. I make the cost of having you so high that even his obsession cannot justify paying it. How? By exposing the truth about Morrison's security consulting. They maintain a clean facade, but their international operations involve activities that would interest both American and Korean authorities. I have evidence of these activities. If Morrison does not retreat, that evidence becomes public. You'd destroy his father's company to stop him? I would demonstrate that I can destroy his father's company. Whether I actually do depends on whether Morrison is smart enough to understand the threat. Lee's expression hardened. But yes, if necessary, I would burn his entire world to keep you safe. That is what I promised you. Simone stared at him, this dangerous man who had somehow become her protector, and felt something shift in her chest. Not attraction, exactly, not gratitude, something more complicated. You really would do that, she said softly. Risk a war with an American security company, create international complications, all for someone you barely know. I told you my reasons. They have not changed. Your sister. And my word. I made you a promise. I do not make promises I cannot keep. They stood there in silence for a moment, the city glittering below them. Two people from completely different worlds, bound together by circumstance and necessity. Do it, Simone said finally. Make him understand, but give him the choice to walk away first. I don't want to destroy anyone unless it's absolutely necessary. Lee Sung-ho's lips curved in that almost smile. You are more merciful than I would be in your position. Or maybe I just don't want to become like him, someone who uses power to hurt people who can't fight back. Morrison can fight back. He has resources, connections, his father's support. You are not bullying someone weaker. You are defending yourself against someone who has consistently refused to accept your autonomy. I know, but there's still a difference between defense and destruction. I want to hold on to that difference. Lee studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Very well. Tomorrow I will make contact with Morrison's father. I will explain the situation and provide a sample of the evidence I possess. I will offer one chance to call off his son and permanently end this harassment. If they do not take that chance, I will proceed to more aggressive measures. Thank you, Simone said, for giving them the option. Do not thank me yet. Mercy sometimes creates more problems than it solves, but I respect your wish to maintain moral clarity in an inherently murky situation. He moved toward the door, then paused. Simone, if Morrison does not take this opportunity to retreat, the next phase will be significantly less gentle. You should prepare yourself for that possibility. I know. After he left, Simone stood at the window for a long time, thinking about power and protection and the thin line between the two. Lee Sung-ho was a criminal. She knew that. His business involved violence, intimidation, activities that would horrify her if she examined them too closely. But he was also the only person who had taken her fear seriously enough to act on it, and that complicated everything. The response from Morrison Security Consulting came faster than expected. Friday morning, Rachel appeared at Simone's apartment with her tablet and her usual unreadable expression. Morrison's father called Mr. Lee directly, Rachel said without preamble. He reviewed the evidence. He understands the implications. He has agreed to recall his son to Chicago immediately and personally ensure that Dante does not return to Seoul or attempt any further contact with you. Simone felt relief flood through her. So it worked? He's leaving? The father is leaving today. He flew here to collect Dante personally. However, Rachel's pause was ominous. Dante is resisting. He believes his father's overreacting. He thinks Mr. Lee is bluffing about the evidence. Is he bluffing? No. Mr. Lee never bluffs. The evidence is comprehensive and would result in federal charges in the United States, criminal charges in 3 other countries, and complete destruction of Morrison Security Consulting's reputation and contracts. Rachel swiped her tablet screen. Dante does not understand that reality yet. He still believes he can negotiate or manipulate his way out of consequences. So what happens now? Mr. Lee has arranged a meeting this afternoon. He wants you there. Simone's stomach dropped. Why? I don't need to be in the room when... Yes, you do, Rachel interrupted gently. Because Dante needs to hear from you directly that you are done, that there is no scenario where you return to him. He keeps pursuing you because he believes if he just tries hard enough, applies enough pressure, you will eventually submit. You must remove that belief completely. And if I refuse to meet with him? Then Mr. Lee proceeds to phase 2 without giving Morrison the satisfaction of understanding why his world is ending. But Mr. Lee believes you deserve the opportunity to face him one final time, on your terms, with complete safety guaranteed. This is your choice. Simone thought about it, about Dante's face at the gala, his fury barely contained, about months of manipulation and control, about the freedom she'd found in Seoul, fragile but real. I'll do it, she said. When and where? 3 p.m., neutral location, a private room at the Shilla Hotel. Mr. Lee will be present. Security will be present. Dante and his father will be present. You say what you need to say. Then it ends. The meeting room at the Shilla Hotel was expensively anonymous, the kind of space where powerful people conducted business they preferred to keep private. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Seoul's skyline. The conference table could seat 12, but currently held only 6 chairs. Lee Sung-ho arrived with Simone 30 minutes early. His security detail swept the room, checked for recording devices, and positioned themselves at strategic points. Min Jun stood directly behind where Simone would sit, a silent promise of protection. Remember, Lee said quietly, you are not here to negotiate or explain yourself. You are here to state reality. Keep it simple. Keep it final. Do not let him draw you into arguments about the past or hypotheticals about the future. What if he tries to apologize, to promise he's changed? Then you acknowledge that change is possible but irrelevant to your decision. Your boundaries are not contingent on his behavior improving. They exist regardless. At precisely 3 p.m., the door opened. Dante entered first, his father right behind him. Frederick Morrison was an older, harder version of his son. Same build, same calculated charm worn like armor, but with the added weight of someone who had built an empire through morally questionable means. His eyes moved immediately to Lee Seung-ho, sizing him up, recognizing a fellow predator. "Mr. Lee," Frederick said, extending a hand. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." "Mr. Morrison." Lee shook his hand briefly. "Please sit." Dante's eyes were locked on Simone. She forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching. "Hello, Simone," he said, his voice carrying that familiar mix of affection and possession that used to make her feel cherished, but now just made her skin crawl. "You look well." "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't do the charm routine. We're past that." His expression flickered with something dark before smoothing back to careful neutrality. "I'm here because my father insisted. He showed me some concerning documents that Mr. Lee provided, documents about our company's international operations. Documents that are accurate," Lee interjected calmly, "and which would be of great interest to federal authorities." Frederick Morrison's jaw tightened. "We understand the position, Mr. Lee. I'm prepared to ensure my son returns to Chicago and does not contact Miss Collins again. I'm here to formalize that agreement." "I don't need an agreement formalized by you," Dante said, his voice rising slightly. "I need to talk to Simone, alone. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." "No," Simone and Lee said simultaneously. Dante focused on Simone. "Baby, please, just let me explain." "I'm not your baby," Simone interrupted, her voice steady despite the anger building in her chest. "I was never your baby. I was your project, your possession, something you could control and shape and manipulate until I fit your idea of perfect. That's not fair. I loved you. You loved the idea of me, the version you created through isolation and control. You didn't love who I actually am because you never let me be who I actually am." Simone felt years of suppressed words rising up. "Every decision I made had to run through you. Every friend I saw, every job opportunity I considered, every outfit I wore. All of it required your approval. That's not love. That's ownership. I was protecting you. From what? From having my own thoughts? My own life?" Simone leaned forward slightly. "I left you, Dante. I filed a restraining order. I moved across the world. I have told you no in every way possible. And you still can't accept it because you fundamentally do not see me as a person with the right to make choices you don't approve of." Dante's face was reddening, his careful control slipping. "I came here to apologize, to try to fix things. I don't want your apology. I don't want you to fix things. I want you to leave me alone, completely, permanently." Simone's voice rang clear in the quiet room. "Go back to Chicago, live your life, find someone else, but leave me out of it. I am done being your obsession." "You think he's better?" Dante gestured sharply at Lee Seung-ho. "You know what he is, right? A criminal, a gangster. At least I'm legitimate." "You filed false police reports," Simone cut him off. "You stalked me across international borders. You violated a restraining order. You hired contractors to plan my kidnapping. How exactly is that legitimate?" Dante went very still. "I never." "You absolutely did," Lee said quietly. "I have the communications, the contracts, every plan you made to forcibly return Miss Collins to the United States. Would you like me to share those details with your father? Or perhaps with the authorities who would be very interested in an American citizen planning international abduction?" Frederick Morrison closed his eyes briefly, the gesture of a man realizing exactly how badly his son had compromised everything he'd built. "Dante," he said, his voice hard as iron. "Enough. We're done here. Dad, if you would just listen." "I said we're done." Frederick stood, his presence commanding the room. "Mr. Lee, you have my word. Dante returns to Chicago today. He will not contact Miss Collins again. I will personally ensure he understands the consequences of violating that agreement. And if he does violate it," Lee asked mildly, "then you release your evidence, and I will not intervene to protect my company or my son. He will face the full legal consequences of his actions." Frederick's voice carried absolute finality. "I built Morrison Security Consulting over 30 years. I will not let my son's obsession destroy it." Dante looked between his father and Lee Seung-ho, finally understanding that he'd lost, that his father, his primary source of resources and protection, had sided against him. "Simone," he tried one last time, his voice desperate, "please, just give me a chance to—" "No," she said firmly. "I gave you 12 months of chances. I gave you forgiveness for things that should never have been forgiven. I gave you control over my life until I almost forgot who I was without you. I'm not giving you anything else. You'll regret this," Dante said, and for the first time, she heard genuine pain beneath the anger. "You'll realize what you had, and it'll be too late." What I had was a cage, Simone replied. I'm glad it's too late. That means I'm free. The silence that followed was absolute. Frederick Morrison stood. Dante. Now. For a moment, Simone thought Dante might refuse, might lunge across the table or make some desperate gesture, but Lee Seung-ho's security detail shifted slightly, and whatever Dante saw in their movements convinced him to remain seated. This isn't over, Dante said, but his voice lacked conviction now. The reality was settling in. He'd lost, completely and publicly. Yes, Lee Seung-ho said quietly, it is. If you contact Miss Collins again, I will end your father's company and ensure you face criminal charges in multiple jurisdictions. If you return to Seoul, you will not leave alive. If you attempt to hire anyone to approach her on your behalf, I will know within hours and respond accordingly. These are not threats. These are promises. The two men stared at each other, and Simone watched Dante truly understand for the first time that he was facing someone who operated by completely different rules than he did. Someone whose power was not dependent on legal frameworks or corporate structures or social approval, someone who would simply eliminate threats without concern for consequences, because he had the resources to manage whatever consequences arose. Frederick Morrison grabbed Dante's arm and physically pulled him toward the door. Dante went, his expression somewhere between fury and devastation, his carefully constructed reality crumbling around him. At the doorway, he looked back one final time. I loved you, Simone, he said. And for once, he might have actually meant it. I know, she replied. But love without respect is just another kind of violence. The door closed behind them. Simone sat very still, processing what had just happened. Years of fear, months of running, weeks of looking over her shoulder. All of it culminating in 5 minutes of brutal honesty in an expensive hotel room. Are you all right? Lee Seung-ho asked quietly. I don't know, Simone admitted. I thought I'd feel relieved, or triumphant, but mostly I just feel tired. That is normal. You spend a long time carrying fear. When it's removed, the absence weighs as heavily as the presence did. Lee stood, gesturing to Min-jun, who immediately moved to the door. Come, I'll take you home. They rode the elevator in silence, walked through the lobby in silence, got into Lee's car in silence. Only when they were driving through Seoul's evening traffic did Simone speak. Thank you, she said, for giving me the chance to face him, for not just handling it without me. You deserve to reclaim that power, Lee replied. Morrison took your voice for a long time. You needed to use it against him, to prove to yourself that you could. Will he really stop? Or will he find a way around his father's control? His father understands business. He understands cost-benefit analysis. Protecting Dante costs him everything he built. He will choose his empire over his son's obsession. Lee's eyes stayed on the road. But I will maintain surveillance for 6 months regardless. If Morrison makes any move toward you, I will know immediately. So I'm still not really free, just differently trapped. Lee glanced at her, something complex crossing his features. Freedom is not the absence of all constraints. It is the presence of choices. You chose to accept my protection. You can choose to end it. Those choices make you free, even within constraints. Simone thought about that as they drove through the city, about the difference between Lee's protection and Dante's control, about consent and agency and the 1,000 small ways power could be wielded. Can I ask you something personal? She said finally. You can ask. I may not answer. Your sister, the one who had an ex who wouldn't stop. What happened to him, really? Lee was quiet for so long, Simone thought he wouldn't respond. Then, I made him understand that his life was forfeit if he came near her again. He did not believe me, so I demonstrated that I meant it. You killed him. I removed a threat that could not be neutralized any other way. The distinction matters to me, even if it does not change the outcome. Does your sister know? She knows he disappeared. She knows she's safe. She does not know the specific details, and I will never burden her with them. Some knowledge serves no purpose except to create guilt. Simone absorbed that. Do you feel guilty? No. I feel satisfied that I protected someone I love from someone who refused to respect her humanity. If that makes me a monster, so be it. But I am a monster who keeps his family safe. They pulled up to Simone's building. Lee got out, walked her to the entrance as he always did. But this time, she stopped him before he could turn away. You're not a monster, she said quietly. You're just someone who understands that sometimes the only language certain people respond to is force. I don't like that reality, but I'm grateful you understand it, because I wouldn't have survived Dante without you. Lee Seung-ho studied her face in the lobby's soft lighting. You survived Dante before you met me. You left him, filed the restraining order, moved countries. All I did was provide resources to make that survival less painful. You did more than that. You gave me the ability to look him in the eye today and say no without being terrified. That's not nothing. No, he agreed. It is not nothing. They stood there for a moment, the usual boundaries of their professional arrangement feeling suddenly less clear. Then Lee stepped back, restoring the distance. Rest this weekend, he said. Rachel will contact you Monday about the next event. And Simone, what you said to Morrison today about love without respect being violence, remember that applies to all relationships, including ours. If I ever make you feel controlled rather than protected, you tell me immediately. I will, she promised. She watched him leave, then went up to her apartment, stood at her windows, looked out at Seoul, spreading below her in all its glittering complexity. For the first time since Dante had appeared outside her apartment building weeks ago, Simone felt like she could breathe fully. He was gone, really gone. Not just temporarily retreated, but forcibly removed from her life with the kind of finality only someone like Lee Sung-ho could provide. She should have felt nothing but relief. Instead, she felt something more complicated. Gratitude, yes, but also the uncomfortable awareness that she'd needed someone else's violence to escape someone else's violence. That moral ambiguity would haunt her in the months to come. But tonight, she was just grateful to be safe. 4 months passed in surprising normalcy. Simone taught her classes, attended occasional events with Lee Sung-ho, and slowly rebuilt the sense of safety she'd lost during her relationship with Dante. Rachel's surveillance confirmed that Dante had remained in Chicago, had even started dating someone new, a detail that should have bothered Simone, but instead just made her grateful he'd found a different target for his obsession. The arrangement with Lee Sung-ho settled into a comfortable rhythm, professional, respectful. He never asked more than she'd agreed to provide, never crossed boundaries, never made her feel like anything except a valued associate, which made the shift, when it came, even more devastating. It started with a business deal gone wrong. Lee's organization had been negotiating with a Chinese syndicate over shipping routes through Busan. The negotiations were tense but progressing, until one of the Chinese representatives insulted Lee publicly at a dinner meeting, questioned his authority, suggested his willingness to work with a Western woman indicated weakness. Lee had remained calm during the meeting, professional, had concluded the business without incident. Then, 2 days later, the Chinese representative was found beaten so severely he required hospitalization. Simone heard about it from Rachel, who mentioned it casually during their weekly check-in as if discussing the weather. Wait, Simone said, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. Lee ordered that? Why? Rachel looked surprised by the question. Because the man disrespected him publicly. That cannot be allowed to stand in Mr. Lee's world. But they'd finished their business. The deal was done. Why retaliate after the fact? Because reputation matters more than any individual deal. If Mr. Lee allows disrespect without consequence, others will test those boundaries. The beating was a message, not to the man himself, but to everyone watching. Simone felt something cold settle in her stomach. Was the man involved in anything criminal? Had he actually done something to deserve that level of violence? Rachel's expression shifted slightly. He insulted Mr. Lee. In our world, that is sufficient reason. After Rachel left, Simone couldn't shake the conversation. She'd known what Lee Sung-ho was, had understood intellectually that his world operated by different rules. But she'd mostly seen the protective side of that power, using force to defend her from Dante, using influence to keep her safe. This was different. This was violence as performance, brutality as brand management. She tried to dismiss it, tried to tell herself it wasn't her business, that her arrangement with Lee didn't require her to approve of everything he did. But it bothered her. 2 weeks later, she attended a gallery opening with Lee, a legitimate cultural event, the kind where his presence lent prestige, and no one asked uncomfortable questions about how he'd acquired the wealth to be such a generous patron. Simone was making polite conversation with a curator when she overheard 2 men talking near the sculpture display. Heard about the warehouse fire in Incheon? One said in Korean, not realizing Simone understood more than she let on. Lee's work, the other replied. Place belonged to someone who'd been skimming from shipments. Lee wanted to send a message. Anyone hurt? 3 workers? Burns? Smoke inhalation? They'll live, but Simone's hands went cold. She excused herself from the curator, walked carefully to the restroom, and stood there staring at her reflection in the mirror. 3 people hurt, maybe permanently scarred, definitely traumatized, because someone had stolen from Lee Sung-ho and he'd responded by burning down their workplace, not targeting the person responsible. Targeting the business, which meant targeting everyone who worked there. When she emerged, Lee was waiting near the restroom entrance. He took one look at her face and his expression shifted. What happened? He asked quietly. Can we leave? Simone replied. Please? He didn't argue. Just guided her out to his car, told his security detail to handle the remainder of the event, and drove in silence until she was ready to talk. I heard about the warehouse fire in Incheon, Simone said finally. Lee's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. I see. 3 people were hurt, people who had nothing to do with whoever was stealing from you. Employees who benefited from that theft, who turned a blind eye to it, who chose to remain loyal to someone who was stealing from me rather than report the activity. Lee's voice remained calm. They were complicit. They were probably terrified of losing their jobs if they reported their boss. They were probably just trying to survive. And now they will survive with the knowledge that working for someone who steals from me carries consequences. Simone turned in her seat to face him. You burned down a building with people inside it. I burned down a building after ensuring everyone had time to evacuate. The 3 who were hurt chose to go back in to try to save inventory. That was their choice, not mine. You're rationalizing violence against innocent people. I'm explaining that in my world, there are no truly innocent people. Everyone makes choices. Those workers chose to work for someone who stole from me. They chose to protect him. They chose to run back into a burning building to save his property. I am not responsible for their choices. Something in Simone's chest tightened. Do you hear yourself? You sound like... She stopped, but Lee finished the sentence. Like Morrison. Like your ex-boyfriend, who refused to accept that other people's choices were valid if they didn't align with his desires? Yes, Simone said quietly. Exactly like that. Lee pulled the car over, put it in park, and turned to face her fully. His expression was controlled, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. I am nothing like Morrison. He hurt you to maintain control over you. I hurt people who pose threats to my business, my organization, my people. The difference is purpose and proportionality. 3 people with burns and smoke inhalation doesn't feel proportional to theft. The theft was 20 million won. The message was priceless. Everyone in my network now knows with absolute certainty that stealing from me is not worth any amount of money. Lee's voice remained level, but Simone could feel the anger beneath it. That message prevents future theft, which prevents future violence. The 3 workers hurt today saved dozens who might have been hurt later. That's the same logic authoritarian governments use. Hurt a few to control the many. I am not a government. I am a businessman operating in a world where the law does not reach, where the only rules that matter are the ones I enforce. You knew that when you accepted my protection. I knew it intellectually. I didn't understand what it meant practically, what it looked like when applied to people who weren't actively threatening me. They sat in tense silence for a moment. Then Lee spoke, his voice quieter, but no less intense. You want to know the truth, Simone? The real truth about power and protection? Yes, they are the same thing. Protection requires power. Power requires the willingness to use violence. You cannot have safety without someone willing to be dangerous on your behalf. You cannot have peace without the threat of war. That is the fundamental truth people like you want to ignore because it makes you uncomfortable. People like me, Simone repeated. People who want to benefit from violence without acknowledging it. You wanted Morrison gone. I made him gone. You did not ask how. You did not want to know the threats I made, the pressure I applied, the evidence I gathered through methods that would horrify you if examined closely. You just wanted the result, your safety, and you were happy to let me handle the morally complicated details. The words hit like physical blows because they were true. Simone had wanted Dante gone, had been grateful when Lee's intervention made it happen, had never asked about the specific methods because she hadn't wanted to know. You're right, she said quietly. I was a hypocrite. I wanted the benefits of your violence without accepting responsibility for it. You were a survivor doing what survivors do, accepting help from whoever offers it. There's no shame in that. Lee's expression softened slightly. But you do not get to judge me for being what you needed me to be. You do not get to benefit from my methods and then condemn those same methods when applied to situations that don't directly serve your interests. So I should just accept that you're going to hurt people, just look the other way. You should accept that the world is more complicated than the moral frameworks you learned in a safe, comfortable life where violence was theoretical. You should accept that sometimes good people do bad things because bad things are the only language certain situations understand. Simone felt tears prick her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. I don't know if I can do that. Then perhaps our arrangement should end. Lee's voice was gentle but firm. I promised you a year. We have 8 months remaining. But if you cannot reconcile what I am with what I provide, then continuing serves neither of us. The thought of leaving his protection terrified her. Dante might be gone, but the feeling of safety that came from knowing Lee Sung-ho stood between her and harm, that was harder to surrender than she'd realized. I don't want to end our arrangement, Simone admitted. But I also don't want to become someone who rationalizes violence because it's convenient. Then do not rationalize it, acknowledge it, Accept it. Understand that everything has a cost, and sometimes that cost is paid in other people's pain. Lee started the car again. I will take you home. Think about what you can accept and what you cannot. We will discuss this when you are ready. The drive back was silent. Lee walked her to her building entrance as always, but the gesture felt different now. Less protective, more obligatory. For what it's worth, he said before leaving, I respect that you care about those 3 workers. I respect that you see them as people rather than acceptable casualties. That moral clarity is rare in my world. But it doesn't change anything, Simone said. No, it does not change anything. I am what I am. You must decide if that is something you can exist alongside. He left. Simone went up to her apartment, stood at her windows, and stared at the city without really seeing it. She thought about the warehouse workers, about the Chinese businessman in the hospital, about all the violence Lee Seung-ho had committed or ordered that she would never know about. She thought about Dante, free in Chicago, probably making some other woman's life miserable. About Lee's sister, safe in Paris, about the price of that safety. She thought about what Lee had said. Protection requires power. Power requires the willingness to use violence. Was he right? Was safety always purchased with someone else's suffering? Or was that just what powerful men told themselves to justify the harm they caused? Simone didn't sleep that night. Just watched the city lights and wondered what kind of person she was becoming. 3 days passed before Simone contacted Lee again. 3 days of teaching her classes, going through the motions, thinking constantly about violence and protection and the spaces between the two. She asked Rachel to arrange a meeting. Lee agreed immediately. They met at the same Shilla hotel where they'd confronted Dante months ago. Different room, same expensive neutrality. Lee arrived exactly on time, dressed in his usual impeccable suit, his expression revealing nothing. You wanted to talk, he said, settling into the chair across from her. I've been thinking about what you said, about power and protection being the same thing, about me wanting the benefits of violence without accepting responsibility for it. And you were right. I was a hypocrite. I was grateful you made Dante disappear without questioning how you did it. I accepted your protection without thinking about what that protection required. Simone met his eyes. But I've also been thinking about what that makes you. Lee's expression didn't change. Tell me, you told me once that you're not Morrison, that the difference between control and protection is consent, that I chose this arrangement freely. Simone leaned forward slightly. But I'm starting to wonder if you understand the difference as clearly as you claim. Explain. Morrison needed to control me because it made him feel powerful. Every restriction he placed on my life was about feeding his ego, proving he could shape me into what he wanted. He was pathetic, a small man trying to feel big by making someone else small. Lee's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he said nothing. You're different, Simone continued. Your violence serves a purpose. It protects your business, maintains your power, keeps your people safe. It's calculated, strategic, proportionate to specific threats. You're not pathetic. You're competent. I sense a but coming. But competent violence is still violence. Purposeful control is still control. You're better than Morrison. Smarter, more measured, more honest about what you are. But you're still using power over people who have less power than you do. You're still deciding that your goals justify harm to others. You're still reducing human beings to acceptable losses in pursuit of your objectives. Lee sat back, his fingers steepled, his dark eyes never leaving her face. You are describing the fundamental nature of power. Every government, every corporation, every organization that has ever existed operates exactly as you describe. The only difference is whether they acknowledge it honestly or hide it behind euphemism and bureaucracy. I know, and that's what's been haunting me. You're not wrong about how power works. You're just more honest about it than most people. Simone took a breath. But here's what I keep coming back to. Honesty about harm doesn't make the harm less harmful. Understanding why you hurt people doesn't make the people less hurt. What is your point, Simone? My point is that you scared Morrison away from me by threatening his father's company. You protected me by being willing to destroy dozens of jobs, ruin lives, maybe cause deaths if federal charges led to people in Morrison's security turning on each other violently. You saved me by being willing to sacrifice people who had nothing to do with me. Yes, and you accepted that protection gratefully. I did. I still do. I'm still grateful Dante is gone. I still sleep better, knowing you stand between me and harm. Simone's voice softened. But I also think you've stopped seeing the cost. You calculate it, you measure it, you determine it's acceptable, but you don't actually see it anymore. Those 3 warehouse workers, to you they're acceptable losses. To their families, their fathers and brothers and sons who came home with burns and trauma. I am aware of that. I factor it into my decisions. Do you? Or do you factor in an abstract cost-benefit analysis and tell yourself that makes it okay? Lee's expression darkened. You are questioning my moral reasoning. I'm questioning whether you have any left, whether you've been doing this so long that you've forgotten what it costs, not in terms of money or power or strategic positioning, but in terms of actual human suffering. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Lee Sung-ho stared at her with an intensity that should have been frightening, and perhaps it was, but Simone had come too far to retreat now. You think I am a monster, he said finally. No, I think you're someone who does monstrous things for what you believe are good reasons, and I think you've stopped asking yourself whether those reasons are actually good enough. What would be good enough? What is the acceptable threshold for violence in your moral framework? I don't know, Simone admitted. Maybe there isn't one. Maybe all violence is fundamentally unjustifiable, and we just tell ourselves stories to make it tolerable. But if that's true, then you don't get to claim moral superiority over Morrison. You're just better at rationalizing. Lee stood abruptly, walking to the window, his back to her. For a long moment he said nothing, and Simone wondered if she'd pushed too far, if this was where their arrangement ended. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. My sister asked me once if I regretted what I did to her ex-boyfriend, if I wished I had found another way. I told her no. I told her I would do it again without hesitation because her safety was worth any cost. He turned to face Simone. She asked me if I thought he deserved to die for hurting her. I said yes, and she looked at me with this expression I had never seen before. Not fear, exactly. Disappointment, maybe. Or sadness. She said, "When did you become someone who decides who deserves to die?" Simone waited, saying nothing. I told her someone has to make those decisions. Someone has to be willing to protect the people who cannot protect themselves. Someone has to be the monster so the innocents can remain innocent. Lee's hands curled into fists at his sides. She said, "But who protects us from you?" The question hung in the air between them. I did not have an answer, Lee continued. I still do not. She is safe in Paris because I was willing to kill for her. But she will not speak to me anymore because I am someone who kills. I saved her and lost her in the same action. Every year on her birthday, I send flowers. Every year they are returned unopened. Simone felt something crack in her chest. I'm sorry. Do not be sorry. Be honest. Lee moved back to his chair, but did not sit. You are asking me to see the cost of my power more clearly. To acknowledge that the people I hurt are not just calculations, but human beings with families and futures. You want me to carry that weight rather than dismissing it. Yes. And if I do that, if I let myself truly see what I do rather than rationalizing it, what then? Do I become paralyzed with guilt? Do I stop protecting the people who depend on me because I cannot bear the moral cost? Do I become useless? Maybe, Simone said honestly. Or maybe you become more careful, more selective about when violence is truly necessary versus when it's just convenient, more willing to find alternatives even when alternatives are harder. Lee laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want me to be a better person while remaining effective at what I do. Those goals are mutually exclusive. Are they? Or have you just convinced yourself they are because it's easier than trying? The look he gave her was complex, angry, hurt, and somehow grateful all at once. You are dangerous, he said quietly. Not because you challenge me. I'm challenged constantly by people who want what I have, but because you challenge me without wanting anything except for me to be better than I am. That is rare. I'm not trying to change you, Simone said. I'm trying to make you see yourself clearly, because I think you've been telling yourself a story about protection and necessity for so long that you've forgotten it's still just a story, a rationalization. And what if I look clearly and decide I am exactly who I need to be? What if I see the cost and determine it is still acceptable? Then I'll know you made that choice with full awareness, and I can decide whether I can exist alongside someone who chooses that. Simone stood, facing him directly. But right now, I don't think you're choosing. I think you're operating on autopilot, doing what you've always done because it's worked before. I think you've stopped asking yourself the hard questions. What questions? Like, do those warehouse workers deserve what happened to them? Not, were they complicit? Not, did they make bad choices? But do they actually deserve to have been hurt? If you had to look them in the eye and explain why their suffering was necessary, could you do it honestly? Or would you hide behind strategic necessity? Lee was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I do not know. It was the most honest thing Simone had ever heard him say. She walked over to where he stood, close enough to see the conflict in his eyes, the careful control fracturing slightly under the weight of questions he'd refused to ask himself. I'm not leaving, she said quietly. Our arrangement continues. I still need your protection, and you still need whatever I provide. but I need you to promise me something. What? That you'll start asking yourself those hard questions, not because I'm forcing you to, not because you want to impress me or prove something, but because you owe it to yourself to know if the person you've become is someone you can actually live with. And if the answer is no, then you decide what to do about that. But at least you'll be making an actual choice instead of just existing on momentum. Lee Sung-ho looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. I will consider what you have said. I make no promises beyond that. That's enough. They left the hotel together, falling into their usual rhythm, him slightly ahead, her beside him, moving through the world with the practiced ease of people who'd learned to navigate each other's boundaries. But something had shifted. Simone could feel it in the quality of the silence between them. Lee could feel it in the way she looked at him, not with fear or judgment, but with expectation that he'd be better than he'd allowed himself to be. In the car, Lee spoke without looking at her. You're the only person in my world who has ever asked me to question what I do. Everyone else either fears me or wants to use me. You just want me to think. Is that so terrible? It is uncomfortable, which usually means it is necessary. He pulled up to her building. Thank you, Simone, for being uncomfortable enough to make me uncomfortable. You're welcome, I think. She got out, started toward the entrance, then turned back. Lee? Yes? For what it's worth, I don't think you're a monster. I think you're someone who's been doing a monster's work for so long that you forgot you had other options. But forgetting isn't the same as not having them. She went inside before he could respond. Lee Sung-ho sat in his car for a long time after she left, staring at the building, thinking about warehouse workers and Chinese businessmen and his sister in Paris who would not speak to him. Thinking about the question she had asked, do they deserve what happened to them? Not from a strategic standpoint, not from a business standpoint, but from a simple moral standpoint that had nothing to do with power or necessity or protection. He did not have an answer, and for the first time in years, that bothered him. He drove away, but the question followed. It would continue following for a long time. 6 weeks later, Simone stood at her apartment windows watching Seoul's nighttime skyline. She'd been in the city for 9 months now. Dante was a fading memory. Her students were thriving. Her life had settled into something approaching normal. Lee Sung-ho had been different since their conversation at the hotel. Not dramatically changed. He was still himself, still operating his business with the same calculated efficiency. But there was a hesitation now, a pause before decisions. Rachel had noticed. Mr. Lee consulted 3 different advisors before approving the response to the shipping container theft last week, she'd mentioned during their coffee meeting. He's never done that before. He usually just decides and acts. What was the response? Simone had asked. Financial penalties, repossession of assets, no violence. The people involved were shocked. They expected much worse. Simone didn't know if that change was because of her challenge or despite it. She suspected Lee didn't know either. Tonight, he was supposed to arrive for their scheduled monthly check-in. Not an event, not a business appearance, just a conversation about how their arrangement was progressing. The knock came at exactly 8 p.m. Lee stood in her doorway wearing casual clothes for once. Dark jeans, a fitted black sweater, looking more human than she'd ever seen him. He carried a folder and a bottle of wine. I brought the contracts for the remaining 4 months, he said, holding up the folder, and something to make reviewing them less tedious. They settled at her dining table, the contracts spread between them. Standard renewal language, no changes to their original terms. You're honoring our full-year agreement, Simone observed. I made a promise. I keep promises. Even when the person you made the promise to challenged everything you are? Lee poured wine for both of them. Especially then. You had the courage to confront me honestly. The least I can do is maintain my end of our bargain. They reviewed the contracts in comfortable silence. Simone signed where indicated. Lee countersigned, professional, transactional. When the business was complete, Lee didn't leave immediately. I wanted you to know, he said quietly, that I have been asking myself those questions, the ones you posed. And I do not have comfortable answers. Some of the people I hurt probably deserved it. Some probably did not. The line between those categories is less clear than I convinced myself it was. That's a hard thing to acknowledge. Yes, it is also necessary. I have been operating on the assumption that my methods were justified by their results. You forced me to question whether the results actually justify the methods, or if I simply want them to. Simone sipped her wine, giving him space to continue if he chose. The shipping container theft, Lee said. The one Rachel mentioned. I wanted to respond the way I always have, violently, publicly, sending a message that would prevent future theft. But you didn't. No, because I kept hearing your voice asking if the people involved deserved what I was planning. And I realized I was defaulting to violence not because it was necessary, but because it was familiar. Because I had convinced myself that harsh responses prevented future problems without examining whether that was actually true. What convinced you to choose differently? Mathematics. I reviewed 10 years of responses to theft in my organization. The violent responses did not statistically reduce future theft more than financial penalties did. The violence was theater, performance. I was hurting people to maintain a reputation for being willing to hurt people, not because it actually accomplished anything material. Simone felt something loosen in her chest. You're saying the violence wasn't necessary. I am saying some of it was not necessary. Some of it probably was. But I had stopped examining which was which. I had made violence my default response and convinced myself that was strategic when it was really just lazy. That's a profound realization. It is an uncomfortable one, because it means I have hurt people for no reason, except that I did not want to think hard enough to find alternatives. Lee's expression was complex. I do not know how to reconcile that. I don't think you're supposed to reconcile it. I think you're supposed to carry it. Let it make you more careful going forward. Carrying it feels like weakness, or it feels like accountability. Depends on your perspective. They sat in silence for a while, drinking wine, watching the city lights through the windows. My sister called me, Lee said suddenly. First time in 3 years. She said she heard I had changed how I handled business disputes. She wanted to know if it was true. What did you tell her? That I was trying to be more deliberate about when violence is necessary versus when it is convenient. She asked why. I told her someone made me look in a mirror and I did not like what I saw. How did she respond? She said she was proud of me. Then she hung up. But she called. That is progress. Simone smiled. Yes, it is. Lee looked at her, his expression unguarded in a way she'd never seen. You forced me to see myself clearly, Simone. You became a mirror I could not look away from. That is not comfortable, but it is valuable. I'm glad. But Lee, I need you to understand something. What? I don't forgive you for the people you've hurt. I don't absolve you of responsibility for the violence you've committed. What you choose to do with your self-awareness is your responsibility, not mine. I'm not here to redeem you or fix you or make you feel better about difficult choices. I know. Do you? Because there's a danger that you'll use me as moral permission. Tell yourself that if I'm still here, if I'm still working with you, then you can't be that bad. That's not my role. I'm here because our arrangement benefits both of us, not because I approve of everything you do. Lee nodded slowly. You are setting a boundary. I'm maintaining clarity. You are responsible for who you choose to be. I am responsible for whether I can exist alongside that. Those are separate decisions. And can you exist alongside who I am? Simone considered the question honestly. I can exist alongside someone who's trying to be better than they were. Someone who asks themselves hard questions and accepts that there aren't easy answers. I cannot exist alongside someone who uses power carelessly and calls it necessity. Those categories overlap sometimes. I know, that's why this is complicated. Lee stood, collecting the signed contracts. I will not promise to be perfect. I will not promise never to use violence again. My world does not allow for complete pacifism. I'm not asking for pacifism. I'm asking for consciousness, for you to know what you're doing and why, rather than operating on autopilot. That I can promise. I cannot guarantee my choices will satisfy your moral standards, but I can guarantee they will be actual choices rather than reflexive responses. That's all I'm asking. He moved toward the door, then paused. 4 months remain in our arrangement. After that, you are free to leave, free to relocate anywhere in the world with enough money to start a new life, free of Morrison, free of me. I will ensure your safety regardless of whether you choose to maintain contact. I know, but I hope you will consider staying. Not as my employee, not under the terms of our current contract, but as someone in my life who is willing to hold a mirror when I need one. Simone felt her breath catch slightly. As what? A friend? I do not have friends. I have associates and employees and people who owe me favors. Lee's dark eyes met hers. But perhaps I could have someone who tells me the truth without fear or agenda. Perhaps that is more valuable than friendship. I'll think about it, Simone said carefully. Ask me again in 4 months when the arrangement ends and I can make that choice freely, without any obligation or power imbalance clouding my judgment. Fair. Lee opened the door, then turned back one last time. Simone, thank you. For not making this easy. For refusing to let me hide behind justifications. For being brave enough to tell a dangerous man that he is becoming something he should not be. You're welcome. Though I'm not sure brave is the right word. Maybe just stubborn. In my world, those are the same thing. He left. Simone watched from her window as his car pulled away, disappearing into Seoul's endless flow of traffic and neon. She thought about the past 9 months, about running from Dante, about grabbing a stranger's hand in desperation, about learning to navigate a world where power and protection were inseparable, about watching someone slowly begin to question the foundation they'd built their entire life on. Lee Sung-ho was not redeemed. She had not saved him or fixed him or transformed him into someone safe and comfortable. He was still dangerous, still someone who could hurt people without hesitation when he decided it was necessary. But he was asking himself whether it was necessary, really asking, not just performing the question to make himself feel better. That mattered. Maybe it didn't matter enough. Maybe it would never be enough to balance the scales of all the harm he'd caused, but it was something. Simone poured herself another glass of wine and returned to the window. The city spread below her, millions of people living their lives, most of them never knowing that people like Lee Sung-ho existed, never knowing about the violence that happened in shadows to maintain the order they took for granted. She knew now. She couldn't unknow it. The question was what she would do with that knowledge. In 4 months, her contract would end. She could leave, start fresh somewhere new, pretend this year never happened, or she could stay, continue being the person who held up the mirror when Lee Sung-ho needed to see himself clearly, continue existing in that uncomfortable space between complicity and accountability. She didn't know which choice she'd make, but she knew it would be her choice, made freely, with full awareness of what she was choosing and why. That clarity, that agency, was worth more than safety ever could be. Simone stood at the window, watching Seoul glitter in the darkness, and felt something settle in her chest. Not peace, not quite, but something close to it. Acceptance, maybe, of complexity, of moral ambiguity, of the truth that people could be both protector and threat, both helpful and harmful, both evolving and stagnant. The world was not as simple as she'd once believed. Neither was she. And somehow, that was okay. 3 months later, on a Friday evening, Simone finished grading the last of her students' essays and packed her bag. Her contract with Lee Sung-ho had 1 month remaining. He hadn't mentioned it. Neither had she. Her phone buzzed. A message from Rachel. Mr. Lee requests your presence at the warehouse district. Address attached. He says it is important. Simone's stomach tightened. The warehouse district, where the fire had been, where 3 workers had been hurt. She almost didn't go. Almost called Rachel back and said she was busy, unavailable, done being pulled into Lee's world whenever it suited him. But curiosity won. Yuna drove her to an industrial area she'd never visited. Gray buildings, shipping containers, the smell of diesel and rain. Not dangerous, exactly, but not welcoming either. Lee stood outside a renovated warehouse, hands in his pockets, watching her approach. What is this? Simone asked, looking around. Something I wanted you to see. He gestured toward the building. Come inside. The warehouse interior had been transformed into a training center. Clean, bright, organized. Equipment for welding, electrical work, computer programming, 20 workstations, all occupied by people of varying ages, all focused intently on their tasks. I do not understand, Simone said. The 3 workers hurt in the fire, Lee explained quietly. They all had families, children. One was supporting aging parents. Their injuries meant they could not return to physical labor, which meant they lost their income. So you're training them? I am employing them. This facility trains workers in technical skills, then places them in legitimate jobs with companies I have connections to. The 3 from the fire were my first students. They now teach others. Lee watched the workers with an expression Simone couldn't quite read. It does not erase what I did, but it provides them with futures beyond the harm I caused. Simone felt her throat tighten. Why are you showing me this? Because you asked me if I could look them in the eye and explain why their suffering was necessary. I could not, so I decided to look them in the eye and give them something instead of explanations. It is not redemption, but it is acknowledgement. One of the workers noticed them, a man in his 40s with burn scars visible on his neck and hands. He walked over, bowing respectfully to Lee. Mr. Lee, he said in careful English for Simone's benefit, the new students are doing well. Thank you for this opportunity. It is not charity, Lee replied. You earn your salary. You teach well. This is business. The man smiled, understanding the lie for what it was, Lee's way of allowing him to keep his dignity. Yes, business. After the man returned to his students, Simone turned to Lee. This doesn't erase the violence. I know. It doesn't make what you did right. I know that too. So why do it? Lee looked at her directly. Because you taught me that I could, that I had options beyond violence or indifference. This is an option. It does not undo the past, but it creates a different future. That is all I can offer. Simone felt something crack in her chest, not breaking, but opening. This is what consciousness looks like. This is what trying looks like. I do not know if it is enough. I do not know if it ever will be enough, but it is better than not trying at all. They watched the workers for a while in silence. Then Lee spoke again, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. 1 month remains in our contract. After that, you are free. I wanted you to see this before you make your decision about staying or leaving. I wanted you to know that your words had consequences, real ones. Not just me feeling guilty, but me actually changing how I operate. Are you asking me to stay? I am showing you why you might choose to. But the choice is entirely yours. No pressure, no obligation, just information. Simone thought about the past 9 months, about everything she'd learned, about the person she'd become. Someone who could exist in moral complexity without losing herself. Someone who could hold powerful people accountable without being consumed by their world. I don't know what I'll choose, she said honestly. I need to think about it. That's all I ask. Just think about it. Really think. Not about what you owe me or what I've done for you, but about what kind of life you want and whether I can exist in that life without compromising who you are. And if the answer is no, then you leave with my gratitude and my protection, and I find someone else to hold up the mirror when I need it, though I doubt anyone else would do it as effectively as you do. They left the warehouse together, falling into their familiar rhythm. But something felt different now, less transactional. More like two people who had chosen to orbit each other's lives rather than been forced into proximity by circumstance. In the car, Simone spoke without looking at him. For what it's worth, this training center is a good thing. It doesn't fix everything, but it's a good thing. You sound surprised. Maybe I am. I'd convinced myself that people in your world couldn't change. That power corrupted so completely that redemption was impossible. I am not redeemed, Lee said firmly. I am just less comfortable with my own moral compromises than I used to be. That is not the same as being good. No, but it's the difference between someone who can grow and someone who can't, and that difference matters. They drove in silence for the rest of the journey. When they reached Simone's building, Lee walked her to the entrance as always. 1 month, he said. Then you decide. I will respect whatever you choose. I know you will. She went upstairs, stood at her window, looked out at the city she'd made her home. Below, Lee's car sat idling for a long moment before pulling away. 2 people, 2 different worlds. Connected by a desperate moment and sustained by mutual honesty that neither had expected to value. In 1 month, Simone would decide if that connection was worth maintaining. But tonight, she just stood at the window and let herself feel the weight of that choice without rushing to answer it. Some decisions required time. Some relationships required distance to understand clearly. Some people needed space to become who they were capable of being. Simone watched the city lights and thought about mirrors and monsters and the strange, complicated truth that sometimes people could be both at once. Lee Sung-ho drove through Seoul, thinking about the woman who had forced him to see himself clearly, about his sister in Paris who had called twice more since that first conversation, about the 3 workers in the training center who would never forget what he'd done but might someday forgive it, about the question Simone had asked, do they deserve what happened to them? He still didn't have a comfortable answer, but he was asking the question, and that, he was beginning to understand, was the entire point. The city stretched endlessly in all directions, millions of people, thousands of stories, countless intersections of power and vulnerability. Somewhere in that vast sprawl, a dangerous man was learning to question his own necessity, and somewhere else, a woman who had survived by being smart enough to know when to ask for help was learning that survival and complicity were not the same thing. They were both becoming something different than they had been, not better necessarily, not redeemed, just more aware of the costs of their choices. That awareness would haunt them both, but it would also save them from becoming the worst versions of themselves. In a world built on power and violence and moral compromise, that was as close to victory as either would ever get. The story ended not with resolution, but with recognition, not with love, but with respect, not with happiness, but with understanding. 2 people, standing in their separate spaces, looking at the same city, asking themselves the same question. What kind of person do I want to be, and what am I willing to sacrifice to become that person? Neither had the answer yet, but they were both finally asking the right question, and in the space between question and answer, something like hope existed. Not certainty, not peace, not redemption. Just the possibility that consciousness mattered, that choices, made with full awareness, could slowly build toward something better than what came before. That even in a world of violence and power and moral ambiguity, people could grow. if they were willing to look in the mirror and not look away. Simone stood at her window. Lee drove through the night. The city glittered between them, beautiful and dangerous and endlessly complicated, just like everything worth understanding. The end. This story explored uncomfortable truths about power, protection, and the thin line between the two. Drop a comment and tell me, could you exist alongside someone dangerous if they were trying to become better? Is consciousness enough, or do past actions define us forever? Which character's perspective resonated with you more, Simone's moral clarity or Lee's practical necessity? Your thoughts matter, and I want to hear them. If this story made you feel something, tension, discomfort, hope, frustration, hit that like button. And subscribe to Love and Tension for more stories that don't offer easy answers but ask important questions. Remember, the most powerful stories are the ones that make us examine ourselves, not just the characters. What did you see when this story held up a mirror?